Hi, I'm Jerry Day. We've got a glamorous model coming into the Light Like a Pro Cafe today for some of our demonstrations. Also, we're going outside and into some graphics to illustrate many of the key principles of lighting for film, video, and stills. You'll be able to use this information right away to get better images, whether you have the pro gear or not, whether you're setting up lights or using natural light. We're going to start by talking about contrast. The average person on the street does not understand what contrast in lighting means, but it means everything in the quality and style of your lighting. I don't mean contrast in a monitor or print, but in the way that light is delivered to your scene. This vertical bar is what we call a grayscale. From white to black, this represents a brightness or luminance spectrum. Nature provides a vast range of photometric values. The human eye can only register a limited range of those values. Film and electronic media are generally not capable of capturing as many shades of contrast as our eyes can distinguish. So to capture or record images, all visible content must be kept within the limits of the medium if it is to contain visible detail on playback. If you learn how to control and produce the right range of contrast for your medium with lighting, you'll create stunning and masterful images. You want to work with the full contrast range capability of your medium, but not exceed that range where details will not be visible to your viewer. That isn't to say that you never want stark images with absolute light and dark areas, but if your lighting and exposure delivers brighter shades than your medium can handle, it's likely to degrade your image with flares and burnouts and other technical problems. It's easy to train your eye to recognize the aspects of contrast in your image as you look at a monitor or screen or print. Extreme high contrast lighting produces hard shadow edges and loss of detail in the lightest and darkest areas of the image. Extreme low contrast lighting causes a flat and hazy appearance and dull images that lack dimension and richness. High contrast lighting is also referred to as hard lighting. Low contrast lighting is called soft lighting. Say that the only 4 ways you can control your light are brightness, color, position, and size. Now, size is the least obvious factor here, but by no means the least important when you realize how much contrast affects the quality of your image. By size, I mean that any object or surface that receives light becomes a light source itself, and the size of the illuminated area is the size of that light. That's what a soft light is, an indirect light, usually a diffusion surface where the actual source of the light is to some extent concealed. The size of the spread of solid even light in that glowing area determines the spread of shadows of objects that are lit by it. The way those shadows spread is a major factor in the qualities of your light and image. This high-key matte surfaced globe will clearly show us the amount of contrast in our light. We'll change the contrast by changing the size of our light source relative to the globe. We're going to start out with a small source for hard, high contrast lighting, then look at larger ones. You can clearly see the contrast in the lighting by looking at the width between the lightest and darkest visible shade on the white ball. In other words, the spread of the shadow. Here's a mid-sized light source. Here's a large or soft light source. Very simply, this is low contrast lighting. By choosing the size of your light source and thereby contrast in your lighting, you change the appearance of the objects in your image depending on their color, texture, and shape. What are the characteristics of hard light? What is it good for? Hard light is what you get from direct bright sunlight or light fixtures with small illumination sources. Some of the advantages of using hard light are, for instance, textures and certain forms are very distinct in hard light because the shadows are so sharp and defining. Hard light saves electricity. With the light pointed directly at the subject, you get the most out of your wattage. Colors are rich with hard light if you can avoid reflections and glare. Hard light is usually very bright and sharp to the eyes and tends to make your subject squint. Hard frontal light can make it very difficult for an actor or model with sensitive eyes. If you turn the subject off-axis from the hard light, you get a lot of deep shadows on the face and start to lose some of the expression and detail. Hard light works well in scenes that don't have shiny reflective surfaces, unless you want that hot glare for an effect. Hard backlight or side light on landscapes can be far more interesting than front light because the hard contouring shadows define shapes so distinctly and create compositionally interesting pockets of light and shadow. With backlight, you'll usually want to shade your lens. On the downside, hard light is not usually kind to faces unless they're very young and smooth with no shiny accessories. Hard light emphasizes texture, which is not necessarily what we want on our model's face. This hard light makes parts of our image burn out and parts are lost in shadow. It may be artistic on a flower arrangement or a weathered face, but it's not generally flattering portrait lighting. Even the Fresnel-type fixtures can produce hard shadows. When they use these in the movies, they use a lot of them and they paint the scene with them, and sometimes they use fill light to soften those shadows. Now let's look at the characteristics of soft light and see if we can do our model a favor with some more flattering light. If we go to the extreme in the direction of soft light, we not only put a big, broad, even light source right behind where the camera will be, we also place a reflector under the chin to fill what few shadows there would be on the down-facing surfaces of our model's face. Our model looks very different and much younger. Now this is very flat light. If we want a little more interesting image, let's split the difference. We'll reduce the size of the source and move it slightly up and over, enough to get a little definition and shadings, while still flattering the model. So the principle of soft light is the larger and more even the light source is surrounding the model, the softer the shadows and highlights are, which means the contrast in the image is low. You can get the same soft quality of light with, say, a 3-foot wide softbox close to the subject, or a 6-foot wide softbox farther out from the subject, as long as the light is the same size relative to the subject. Only if we increase or decrease the light size relative to the subject do we increase or decrease the contrast in our image. Some people misunderstand brightness. If you're changing your overall light levels up or down, you're not changing the quality of your light. Your camera settings compensate for that. When you change lights relative to each other, then you affect the contrast and the look of your scene. If you want a dim scene, it doesn't necessarily mean that you want to dim all your lights. Dim all but a few isolated narrow shafts of light. You generally want to utilize the full shade spectrum even in scenes that are supposed to be dark. You just use less of the bright and more of the dark. We'll talk about how to control that bright light in a moment, but let's get back to soft light for a minute as it compares to hard light. Of course, soft light gives you a larger palette of mid-shades to wrap subjects. Forms are defined, but with a subtle grace. Certain classical styles are only possible with soft light. It flatters faces, and it reduces contrast, so it prevents things from disappearing in black shadows or burning up in highlights. Soft light looks more natural in certain cases. It allows the viewer to take in the scene because more of it is in the visible middle shades. The risks or downside of soft light are first that it can wash out a subject, giving the appearance of an institutional setting with little visual style or appeal. To light with soft light, you need more overall wattage to illuminate the scene because much of the light is absorbed by the softening device or method. Soft light tends to spill around in places where you don't want it, but generally soft light is a more forgiving style of light than hard light. Soft light can be made and found in many different ways. The sky itself is a soft light when the sun is just above or below the horizon or diffused by clouds. Open shade, where a lot of sky or bright surfaces bounce light in, gives you different forms of soft light. But if your background has direct sunlight, you may have some contrast problems. It'll be too bright back there. In that case, look for shaded or darker backgrounds. A natural soft light can be found in the form of a window, door, or passage with indirect skylight and no direct sun. This is referred to as available light. Of course, you must move your camera and subject to achieve the best lighting, and you're pretty much stuck with whatever background you get when the light is at the best angle to your subject. Soft light can be created by bouncing light off any light surface, including walls, ceilings, cards, white sheets, or various handy reflectors, fixtures, and umbrellas available at lighting equipment outlets. To bounce light like this, you'll undoubtedly need more wattage than, say, a 100-watt household bulb. A medium shot of a person using bounce light might call for 600 watts. To soft light a whole room may call for 2,000 watts or more. If you don't want to blow a household circuit, don't put more than 2,000 watts on the line. An old house may only take 1,500 watts or less per circuit. If you're going pro and you have a budget, a soft light is a good thing to have. It's very useful. Go to a video supply outlet and have them explain the different kinds, what they're good for, what's available. Don't use standard household fluorescent lighting. Those colors are not right. They're very hard to balance for video. Pro fluorescent lights are balanced and corrected for that. And actually, they're terrific because they run very cool and they don't sweat your talent. Now here's a special case where soft light must be taken to extremes. If you're shooting shiny objects like silverware, metal jewelry, dark ceramics, chrome appliances, anything like that, real shiny stuff. They're like curved mirrors. These objects clearly reflect every single object in the room. So you actually have to tint the object with a diffusion material and cast soft lights around the tint to find a good lighting effect. Remember, this is soft light and things gleam, but they don't twinkle. If you want the twinkle of diamonds or sharp highlights, you have to combine some small hard lights with that soft light. Speaking of shiny objects, in commercial automobile photography, because automobiles are shiny sheet metal, often they must be tinted in massive indoor stages for photographs where crews work for days to create the right reflection in every inch of the car body. The only time a car is naturally lit anything like this, say outdoors, is at sunup, sundown, or on a softly overcast day. So if you want to shoot a gleaming car, look for a sunless but bright sky, uncluttered surroundings so you won't have objects reflecting in the car, and a background that reveals the outline of the car. You always need to consider what's called color temperature. You may know that daylight is bluish and tungsten or room lights look yellowish. Our eyes don't usually notice these color differences, but they're exaggerated in images, so they should be balanced and matched if the scenes are to look normal. When you can't avoid mixing daylight and tungsten sources in one image, your lighting supply can sell you blue gels that go over your tungsten lights and filter out the yellow-orange spectrum to match daylight. Now all your light will be perfectly even in color. Those gels do cut down the brightness of your lights, though. Instead, you may want to use orange gel, which they sell at the video supply, and you put those over your windows. And that'll take the daylight down to tungsten balance, and that will match your indoor lights. That also helps reduce the glare and brightness from the outside windows. It's usually a lot brighter than your lights. Whichever way you go, you have to make sure your camera is set or filtered for the right color temperature, daylight or tungsten. What about when there's more than one light source? That gets back to contrast. The important thing is to be able to strictly control the levels between the light sources to keep all the shades in the scene looking good in the final output. Sometimes it's as easy as controlling the color of objects in the image. This shot is a contrast nightmare. Bright and dark wardrobe, bright and dark background areas. By thinking ahead about props and wardrobe and adjusting for background, you can make a lot of difference in image quality. In this case, we replaced the bright wardrobe and shifted the background, which enables us to increase the exposure and see the detail in the dark areas. Much better shades in this image. White objects are difficult to light without getting burned out or overexposed areas, especially in scenes with darker objects. Until you're highly skilled at controlling your light, it may be a good idea to avoid using a lot of white wardrobe and objects in your images. If everything is bright, you won't have as much trouble. Whether you have one light source or many, don't think about where you want to place your light fixture. Think about how you want your light to look, and move your fixture around until that happens, until you discover something. You'll be surprised that sometimes you may have nothing but a backlight or two and that's it. As you light, study your image and experiment with lights over and over. If you're shooting stills, shoot lots of test shots while you work on your lighting. Before digital cameras, the pros shot Polaroids, lots of them, and fiddled with the lights to perfect the image before they switched to film. In the scene we just lit here, we had to find the right balance between the model's key light, the one on her face, her backlight, the one on her hair, and the light on the background. Every time you set a light, you check the image and think how you can improve your image with the light. Allow time for this when you schedule your production. The more you do it, the less time it will take. Watch what happens when we mess up the ratio of our lights. If I was lighting this, I would think, okay, the hair light and the background light are way too bright, the key light on the model is way too dark. The test image tells you what it needs. But also, you can use your creative imagination to design interesting lighting that serves your message, your story, or the intended mood of the image. It pays to observe and analyze every detail of your test image. You don't always need a light. Sometimes a reflector card or fill card will do the job you want. If you have white or light shaded surfaces in the studio, they may provide fill light and keep the shadows from falling to black. If you want deep shadows, you need to have dark surfaces around your subject, and you must control your lights from spilling. There are a lot of devices and methods for controlling your light. It's just as important where you don't put light as where you do put it. If you think of lighting as painting your image with light and dark, you'll probably wind up with interesting images. Unless it's a comedy skit or a talk show, it's probably helpful to maintain some interesting shadowing somewhere. Soft lights spill light all over the place, so they make grids called honeycombs or egg crates to put on the front of them. These channel the light in narrower beams. A soft light and a grid screen are a powerful combination for versatile, attractive lighting. On a direct light, those barn doors are essential to target your light. Professional fixtures can often be adjusted to spot or flood, but remember, floodlight is not soft light. It's hard light over a wider area. Just as with a honeycomb, we have a soft light over a narrower area. Flags, cutters, and shadow casting patterns can be placed to add interest. This is black foil from the lighting supply store. It can be clothes-pinned on nearly any type of fixture to control the light. I use this all the time. It's black for a reason. Kitchen tinfoil would kick light everywhere, which defeats the purpose. One of the best ways to control your lighting ratios is with dimmers. There are many different kinds for every type of professional and even household lighting. Nothing beats dimmers for balancing your light ratios. If you don't have enough dimmers, the lighting supply store has neutral density gel that can be used to balance light sources. You just put that right over your light. It's neutral gray and comes in fractions and multiples of f-stop values. If you have a few sheets each of half-stop, full-stop, and two-stop neutral density gel, you'll be able to accomplish a lot with your basic lighting setups. When you finish lighting a scene, put your head in front of the camera and look at the scene. Now you might have some glare in your face. Look for those bright spots and shade the lens. That'll be your final touch to keep all the glare out of your camera lens. To make good images, you have to know what to look for in your image, how to recognize a problem or an opportunity, and how to work on it. You simply can't make consistently good images unless you create, analyze, and adjust as you go. First, look at your overall exposure. You don't want to change your light if you should simply be changing your camera exposure settings. This test shot needs some work. There's no detail or shadings in the highlights or shadows, so we can't fix this simply by adjusting our camera's exposure settings. We've got too much contrast in the lighting of our scene. We've got to deal with highlights and shadows separately, so first we're going to lower our exposure settings on the camera. And that fixes our highlights. That's the easy way, and that's all done. That looks good for now. Now for the shadows. Ease some fill light into your black holes. Don't overdo it and wash out your image. Make sure to isolate your light to the spots you want it. Experiment with the light positions until the objects look the way you want them to. There's a very useful concept. It's like contrast, but it's something that designers and artists call separation. The term separation means contrast, but it refers to a particular object or area within your image. An important object in your image can get lost or de-emphasized if it is not placed against a contrasting field or outline. In other words, visually separated for the viewer to easily discern. In this shot, the outline of the model's hair is blending into the background shades, and we don't have a descriptive image. By making slight adjustments to the position or brightness of selected lights, we can make our subject stand out and our image communicates better to the viewer. The separation of key graphic elements in your image holds viewer attention It's one of the secrets that makes movies better than life, so to speak. If you're shooting a product for a commercial or print ad, good separation is absolutely essential. Here's a great lighting exercise that will build your skills. Take a white cube, any kind of a square white cube, and place it at an oblique angle to the camera with 3 sides showing about equally. Then light that cube so one side is almost white, another side is medium gray, and the other side is almost black. The tricks you'll have to use to get that right will be useful to you in every lighting setup you ever create. If you're using a camera or lens with an auto iris, remember the auto iris is a little stupid. Usually the most important thing in your shot are the skin tones and faces, but the auto irises just see the light and dark. Watch what happens in certain circumstances when we let our auto iris just float free. The skin tones here are way too dark because the auto iris is adjusting for the bright background. Here, the black background and clothing cause the auto iris to open up, which overexposes the face. To get a good image with an auto iris, make sure your scene's background has about the same average brightness as your subject. One thing that really helps is to observe light, both in life and in media. Ask yourself, how did they light this? Where was the light coming from? What kind of light was used and how many of them? Why does it look so good? You'll discover tricks and methods that you can use. Well, that's it for this session. Try out some of those principles while they're still fresh in your mind. Bye-bye.